Before, I never knew really why I was making these videos. Obviously, I like talking about books. I like doing this type of content, but I didn't know, I guess, what the objective was. And then I've been thinking about it recently, and now that I've done like 10 plus of these videos, and I've realized a lot of these books I'm trying to bring you guys are books that I would consider for non-traditional readers. I don't know what I mean by that, because there is no traditional reader, but I feel like a lot of people grew up reading. A lot of people have a cultivated love of reading like childhood favorite books and stuff like that, and that's not who I am at all. I would say like 85% of the books I've read in my life I've read in the last 3 years, and that's just being honest. I didn't enjoy reading growing up. I didn't read any of the books they gave me in school and did just fine. I wasn't really interested in reading too many books as a kid, but in my 20s, my mid-20s, or in college, and then into my mid-20s, I picked it up, and then I've really started increasing how much I've been reading the last few years as I've discovered what I enjoy. And in that discovery, I've realized that books can be really cool. Books are written by all different types of people from all walks of life, and I want to introduce some of these finds to you guys. So that's really what GP's library is about bringing books to, I guess, non-traditional audiences, because I understand that most book stuff is catered towards certain people, and I've never found those things to be catered towards me, but hopefully my channel can be. And that leads me right into today's book, which is Hurricanes, a memoir by Rick Ross. And he also had another co-author on it. I'm not even gonna get into that. It's on the cover of the book. I really looked it up and just kind of really realized I know a lot of these people who aren't really writers work with a writer to get the book made, to get structure, I'm sure, to help with punctuation, even little things like that, before even an editor will get their hands on the book. I actually listened to the audiobook, which was not read by Rick Ross, and it says I finished it on January 16th, 2021. So it's been a few years since I've read this book. One of those books that I'm doing a lot off of memory, a lot of letting it marinate, and then more big picture, because I'm sure I don't remember a ton of the smaller details in the book. I remember a few things that are obviously memorable for me, but it's not going to be as fresh as if I listened to it yesterday. Let me get into my main takeaways. My first main takeaway, and I may have talked about this in another book, is how much we assume about celebrities. In this book, Rick Ross talks about like his collegiate experience, his football experience, his experience of like working in the penitentiary, like people always talk about him for, his experiences growing up in the Deep South, just all his experiences then coming up in the game and like becoming a prominent rapper. As he discusses all these ideas, I realize how much I think I had been assuming or really filling in the blanks. And he's been on podcasts a lot now. When I finished this book, this says in 2021, his story wasn't out like it was now. Like podcasts were really just during that COVID pandemic time starting to like turn over into being like dominant. Don't get me wrong, podcasts have been big for a long time, but a lot of these rappers and people like that, it wasn't what it is now, in my opinion. And you'd have to watch so many interviews by somebody to get the same stories and ideas that are actually written in a book. I guess that would be another main takeaway from this book, but this is for any memoir or anything you read about a celebrity or something like that. There's just way more information. If you think you know their full story and they have a book out and you haven't read their book, you probably don't even know that great of a percentage of their story, to be honest, unless you've really done like hours and hours of internet research. Just because books tend to be the whole compiled interviews and articles and Wikipedia pages and all this stuff just compiled into one source, and then when you read something you also retain information a little bit different than maybe if you just watch them on TV. So all these things I say to say that like you really need to read somebody's book to even get an understanding of, because obviously people can lie, but it's harder to do that in a book to me than it is in an interview. When you read something you're like, but no way. Maybe sometimes they could just lie and get by with it, but I don't know. I feel like books are more of a truer form of people's story. Another main takeaway for me, and Rick Ross really highlights this, is how long it took him to get on in the rap game. And it took him a decade from starting to when hustling made him go like nationally famous in the US. He said it took him exactly about a decade, and he was like burnt out at that point. Like he had been going so hard traveling, getting really nothing up until that point, and he started to learn a little bit about what was going wrong, and he learned how to slow down his lyrics and how to put emphasis on things and how to become the Rick Ross that we know now, how to actually live even out the life that he was rapping about. So Rick Ross talks about that, and that taught me a lot of patience, because he started, when he dropped out of college, he started rapping like full-time, or trying to rap full-time, plus all his other side shit, at about, I think it was 19, 20, and then I think he said it was 29 or 30 when hustling like became big. So we have to be patient. And that brings me kind of to a separate point, in that Rick Ross still isn't that old, and he's been rich for a while now. He's had money for a while now with the Wingstops and all that other type of stuff, and he's not that old. So I really feel like at the age I'm at now, and you're in like mid to high 20s, you feel like you're getting older, but you're not old at all. We're not old at all. I don't know, reading these stories really reinforces that idea for me, because I wouldn't consider Rick Ross an old person, and he's gotten to live a very, very good life for probably 20 years at this point. A little bit less, but it's worth that struggle, it's worth that grind to be who he is today. I've brought this up in other videos, but this book also shows how things can be what you want them to be. He puts some of his rap lyrics in the stories to be like, yeah, this story that I rapped about was true, like this is real. And that's cool. I haven't read that many books by rappers at all, but I haven't seen that before, to where like they're quoting their own lyrics in a book. And when I listened to an audiobook, so it's like this person, whoever was orating it, rapped out the lyrics, and Rick Ross is explaining like how these things worked out in his life. It's interesting. It was a cool way, a cool take, even a cool backup for him, or like a cool way to verify the things that he's saying in his music are true. And then another thing about Rick Ross is, a main takeaway that I got from this book is that rappers can make a side career of writing, because he talks about how much he writes for other artists and how he can put together verses like easily in other people's voices. Like he could do it for a woman, he could do it for guys, he could do it from a dude that's from the streets, or do it from a guy that's not from the streets. He has a talent for like his wordplay, and you can hear it in his music. I hear it clearly. I'm a Rick Ross music fan. Like, I'm a fan of his music, and his wordplay is nice. Obviously, the emphasis and the voice and stuff like that is what really puts him on, and he has pretty good beat selection as well. But it's interesting to see how he got to that, because he talks about how he can rap fast. Like if he just wants to get on a track and just like spit, like how he originally started rapping, he said for the first like 8-9 years of his career, before he realized that wasn't working for him and he needed to slow it down and really give emphasis on his words. He has the different range, and by rapping those and by writing other people's lyrics and all this stuff, he's developed a whole skill of being able to write that is just as valuable as him being able to write his own songs and perform. And I think that's interesting for artists. Especially musical artists. I'm not a musical artist myself, but I think this book, and it's been some years now that I read it, so I think this book is really what like put me on to that idea of the fact that these guys are writers, like Jay-Z, and these people are like high-level writers. Not all rappers are high-level writers. Some rappers are better at the flow. Some have the voice. Some can perform. Some have like the charisma. Some have all these different elements. But some of these dudes are great at writing, and not only writing in their voice, but writing in other people's voices and telling other people's stories in their own words, or in that other person's words, but while writing it themselves. And that's a pretty impressive skill. But overall, this book is what I think I described at the beginning. I think it's a great book for people who aren't that interested in books. Even if you just listen to it, kind of how you listen to a podcast, just put it on as an audio book the same way I did, I think you would actually really enjoy the story. It would clear up, and you would understand that we don't know these celebrities that well. And I also think that it could get somebody on the path to reading more books, because there's a lot of good, exciting books like this out there. I'm just going to try to bring them to you. So come back for some more. And so that actually gets me into my last point, which is who it's for. obviously Rick Ross fans, if you like his music, he put some of his lyrics in the book. You see how he's grown MMG and how he's made mistakes within MMG. He's honest about those things. So if you want kind of more real story about Rick Ross other than what's just in tabloids or whatever, I suggest it. Music fans in general, you can see how the music game kind of works through him talking, even the connections you get, how a lot of like some street connections can lead to like real life connections, how people link up in the music industry, because how people get collabs and all that stuff isn't really clear. He talks about a lot of that stuff. He talks about just the life of a musician. So a musician who's trying to make it and be at least as big as Rick Ross, which is pretty big. I'm pretty sure he's been nominated for Grammys, like a good amount of them. So he's at a high level in music. And I think a lot of artists could learn from that. So I would suggest it for music fans or for aspiring artists. Also businessmen. He runs multiple businesses because he has Wingstop. He has his music like production in terms of like endorsing other artists. He has his ownership in music. He has his own personal music. He has his like car shows. He has a lot of different ventures. If you would want to see how somebody tries to build like an empire, he rents out his house to like movie studios and all this other type of stuff. He makes money many different ways. And so if you were somebody who's aspiring to build a sort of empire of your own, I think it's useful for you as well. Lastly, if you just want to learn about the Deep South, he comes from a rough Deep South background. I probably brought this up in the Gucci Mane biography that I talked about in an earlier video. The Deep South is like a rough place for a lot of people, and these books really give insight into how these people are who they are as adults because of their upbringing. A lot of these people have very rough upbringings that make it tough. And when you have a rough upbringing and then you cross that with money, sometimes good things can happen, sometimes not great things can happen. But a lot of these stories can show you how these things happen just in general. So if you want to read about like the Deep South in America, which a lot of people don't really know about, it's a book that's also interesting for that. And lastly, in this video, I want to get some action steps, because when I read these memoirs, I learn from other people's stories. There's stuff that inspires me, and my action step for this is actually pretty simple. It's just to not quit at what you want to do, even if you're doing another job, even if you have to do other things to make ends meet. Don't quit. It took him 10 years, and like I said, he's living a good life in his 40s now. There's no reason to give up on what you want to do. It's possible. Guys, Hurricanes by Rick Ross, a great memoir. I enjoyed it. Definitely unique. Listen to it, read it, check it out. Put in the comments below if you've read it or listened to it. Let me know what you think. I'll see you guys next time.